Well, good morning. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Apologies for being late, but the entire panel was actually stuck in the elevator for some time. But we did make it here after a great view of the City of London. This panel is designed to talk about building a global workforce and understanding the changing demography which is occurring at quite a fast pace around the world. We are just back from our Asia Summit in Singapore, and you look at countries like Malaysia, Indonesia, where literally tens of millions of people are entering a middle class that didn't exist before and getting a toehold into the world of work. Looking at more established economies in the United States, for a very long time, this idea of diversity and inclusion has been part of the HR tableau for a long time, and we're going to talk about whether or not that's been successful. How do you target diverse workforce attendees? How do you get people in your employee population to resonate with your potential customers? How do you message in a world where there's 600 million individual users on Facebook? As a percentage of the population, you have an ability to reach people like never before. And what is the construct of work? Well, what does work even mean? Given how people are working through mobile technology, there's not the same paradigm where you would go to an office, have a career for 40 years, and exit to retirement. Today, by any statistics, the recent college graduate would assume to have 7 different careers, not 7 different places of work, but change what they do 7 times over the course of their work life. We want to talk about work and life and how that balance interplays today versus in the past. So I'd like to first start with Sonia. You are one of the few female executives on Wall Street, and I think I'd like to start talking about the gender issue and why some 40 years into the women's movement, in your space in particular, in financial services on Wall Street, why are there still so few women in senior executive positions?
I think there's a lot of reasons. I think for our firm, we're rather unique because we actually have a lot of women. About 40% of our workforce is women, and a third of all our VPs and above are actually women, which is unusual. And I think it's because of our culture. We're small, so we can actually mentor the women. And I think it's much harder to do in a large organization. A lot of women, once they have children, there is a work-life balance issue, and there is no such thing as superwomen, although every woman feels that she needs to be superwoman. And I think it needs to be a one-on-one conversation and mentor experience in terms of making women feel that they don't need to be superwomen. We're going to figure it out. We want you back. And it has to be a one-on-one conversation. Whereas I think in a big organization, that's a lot harder to do. I mean, I think everybody's trying. They're doing flex time, and they try to allow women to come back part-time, but a lot of women...
Come back after having a child.
After having a child, but
right.
I think a lot of women experience you get less interesting work. You're treated differently. So I think it's about the culture and really just being a smaller organization, being able to do that. I'm not sure how you would actually put that into practice in a large organization, but that's really the problem. The entering class in big organizations in terms of, out of business school is 50-50, and then once you get up into upper management, obviously the number falls dramatically.
Right. And as you know, I spent my career at a very large organization, and that theme of making it about women and flex time, I think really needs to be changed to about parenting, because both genders participate in parenting, and until we reframe that dialogue as a non-women's issue but a parent issue. Toby, you do work for a very large organization. I think you have some 400,000 employees. I think it would be interesting, having spent some of your career in Asia, and to contrast kind of, especially along gender lines, how was your experience working in Asia versus elsewhere in the world?
Well, I think in Asia, I suppose I spent some time out there in the late 1990s, the early noughties, and it was very clear that one of the hangovers from the communist era is actually the empowerment of women was quite a strong force. That in some ways, the West, we always feel we're ahead on that. Women returned to work very quickly. after having children, but that's because of their extended families. Kids are looked after by grandparents. So you're right to put it in the context of a parenting issue, whether it's grandparents or whether it's, you know, the husband looking after the kids rather than the women looking after the kids. That's something that we're all going to have to address. Mm-hmm. Certainly for Siemens, we're an engineering company, and when we look at the number of women in Siemens, then we see quite a high percentage in finance, say, or supply chain management, but we don't see the same number of women in engineering, and that's what we're aiming to boost, that's what we're aiming to change.
And when you think of the work-life balance that we're talking about, mm-hmm. that need for corporations to respond, Jody, I want to turn to you, because fully 1/3 of the workers in the United States now would identify themselves as freelance, and you have done extraordinary work in that vein. So talk to us about what is the complexion of today's employee, and what are they expecting from a work-life balance?
So it's actually fascinating. The trends globally are that more and more people are choosing to be independent for at least a portion of their career. In the UK, it's about 1.4 million workers. In the EU, it's 8.9 million. It's gone up by 45% since 2004. So what you have to recognize is the workforce is changing, and employers need to understand how to access this talent. And what you want to think about is, why are so many people doing this? Because even those who may have been forced into it because of a bad economy like it. And what we've surveyed our talent, and what they tell us, who's all independent, is the two most important reasons they like being independent is they like to choose who they work with and what they work on. It's not flexibility, which is so interesting. That's third or fourth on the list. And so what it means for companies is both internally understanding the kind of variety that people want, the ability to have more control over what they do is really driving this. And when you look at the three populations that I think are really going to impact the labor force, millennials, women who are, at least in the US, are getting more of the advanced degrees than anyone else, and baby boomers who are retiring but still want to stay involved in the labor force, all three of these groups will very much align with what the independent worker is looking for. And so I think it's very important, as we think about labor force in the future, to understand these trends and understand both how to access this talent and also understand what it is that's driving them.
And what's the gender composition of the people with whom you work?
70% male.
Okay.
And it's 70% male because it mirrors the MBA pool, which is largely, we deal with very high-level executives and consultants. And many of them work full-time, but they like the control. And it's very interesting. And I loved what you said about not making this about a woman's issue. One of my favorite lines is Mark Weinberger, who's the head of E&Y, says, women don't want to be singled out and men don't want to be left out. And I think that is a really insightful comment about where we need to go from corporate America. And, you know, we're all in it together.
Right. I think that the language also needs to change. I mean, even magazines that tout the 50 most powerful women in this or that, by design, that indicates it's an aberration.
Exactly.
So until we upend the dialogue around that, it would be preposterous to say the 50 most powerful men. You wouldn't have such a magazine. So therefore, the assumption by singling out women is indicative that that's a problem in some way.
I agree.
So I want to turn to Chris now, because while this idea of project work and picking with whom you want to work is quite attractive, at Starbucks, I'm assuming that I can't do that. So because I need to come up and show up for my shift. So in your employee experience, could you tell us, like, what are you doing from a corporate perspective to attract and retain talent into Starbucks?
Well, that's right. I mean, it's not always true in every case, but I would say that broadly, because we've got such a large group of people and being physically in a place is pretty important to Starbucks. We got to be a little more creative. Not trying to answer that tactically, I would say that our view around people has changed quite a little bit over the last couple of years, particularly. I think particularly with millennials. 70% of the people who work at Starbucks in our retail stores are millennials. One of our biggest realizations recently is 70% of the total group also are students or aspiring students. And that's helped inform a little bit of what we've done to attract and retain talent over time. But I would say that broadly, we have focused on two or three things as we think about how we, before I get to the answer, how we engage this group. One is, I think, a value set, because I think especially if you are trying to attract a millennial and keep them in the business for a long time, value is incredibly important. And we spend a lot of time up front, even at the retail level, making sure that we get somebody who understands what the company's about, and hopefully we'll see it as part of their life, because work is a big part of your life.
In that age group, do you sense that there's an increasing need for alignment between my social values and where I work?
I think it's almost more important now than it's ever been. It may be the most important decider when someone makes a decision, especially in our business, about where they're going to work, because it's not money that's the driver. It is absolutely true. And value set is a big piece of it. And for us, that is, believing that there's something more to business than just making money. And for a lot of people, that's, particularly in that millennial crowd, a very important piece of the puzzle. I think the other thing is just engaging them creatively and individually, which actually in retail you can do if you're creative about it yourselves. And then I think this bigger idea around teaching life skills. We, for a long time, were very focused on very distinct training about what you needed to do in a store every day. And we've expanded that quite a little bit recently to really try to engage a philosophy around, could you learn something in a store besides just making coffee that you could take elsewhere, either in your career at Starbucks or well beyond, because we're not naive. We know that everybody who joins Starbucks is not going to stay at Starbucks their entire life. But we know we can have an impact, I think, particularly with young people and particularly with millennials, by engaging them on life skills, not just technical skills. And that has made, whether we design it that way or not, has made a very big impact on our ability to keep people for a longer period of time, especially that are younger.
Mm-hmm. Great. So, Greg, you're turning out students into this new world of work. And have you thought through changes to the curriculum that might differ today than, say, 10 or 15 years ago? And what are you doing about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, as a side note, what's interesting about the conversation we just had about women in the workforce, if you look at, we're the largest in the University of Phoenix, which is one of the schools that we own and operate. Apollo does in the U.S. Over 60% of the students are female that are coming in. And that's, if you look at the averages across the nation, there are more women than men in school. But it is interesting that that hasn't yet translated. We're asking ourselves, where are all the men in college? Because they're not coming the way they used to. Yeah. But what's the time horizon that will translate into the labor force? And we have had, just to answer the question directly, to change our curriculum. We continue to change our curriculum, and here is how we do that. Apollo Education's been around for just over 40 years, and now it's a global education and training company. So we have a university here called BPP, and we operate in other countries as well. But the difference today versus even 10 years ago is these universities would get together, create content, curriculum, decide what was the right thing for students to learn, and put it out to the students. And there was a good learning process there. Today, what we're doing is sitting down with employers, right, like the Siemens of the world and others, every week to understand what they need, because human capital, as we understand it, is their most precious, piece of the puzzle. They can get cheap financial capital really everywhere in the world right now. That could change. But the human capital piece of it is what is empowering companies to grow, like Starbucks and Google and Siemens and others. And the frustration that I hear from CEOs, and I'm meeting with one every week, it seems like, of a Fortune 500 company, is it's not as seamless as it should be. In the US, there's 30 million people on the sidelines that are underemployed or want a job. Why are there 4 million posted jobs that aren't being filled in our country? It's absurd. So I think the educational and training institutions have to do a better job of meeting, sitting down, talking, thinking, and listening to the employers of what they need to be relevant. So when you're done with school, you're employable immediately. And that means thinking about our curriculum, changing it, and getting it into the system quickly.
So, Toby, at Siemens, in your world, technology is moving at such an incredibly fast pace. Are the school curriculums keeping up? Is there a disconnect between people that are entering and where you need to take them?
Well, I just only echo Greg's thoughts. Actually, from the other perspective, as an employer, for a long time, we've said, well, the education system has delivered something, but it's not what we wanted. And you can see today that the supply of skills and the demand for skills are not well matched. And the only way you're going to get that right is by an engagement from enterprise with providers. So today, because technology is moving very fast, that means that the curriculum has to move incredibly fast. And the dynamism within that will only happen if employers engage directly with providers in order to make that happen. And so Siemens is incredibly actively engaged in that. If I take an example here in the UK at our Lincoln site, we would have people engaged with the schools, with parents, starting to think about STEM skills or STEM subjects to encourage girls to come into that community, and then right the way up to a School of Engineering, supporting the factory that we have in the university, and our researchers looking at the future of gas turbines in this case, sit in the university, and the university professors are also sitting in our factory. So it's incredibly well linked. Our customers are using the same equipment as our apprentices, and so the flow is very direct. And it's that kind of model that will become much more pervasive to get this chain of supply and demand linked up.
And Sonia, when you're thinking through from the investment portfolio and deploying capital, I mean, are some of these attributes bubbling up as an indicator of successful companies that you'd want to invest in? Are you thinking about metrics about how companies are reinventing themselves towards this new workforce in the 21st century?
Not focusing directly on it, but obviously it's a plus. I mean, women on boards is increasing, and there have been studies that women obviously give a different perspective, and that many boards function much more productively with women on boards. From the investment perspective, we actually have very few women that actually do investing, and unfortunately, that's because, again, a lot of the women leave. That's a very hard job to do part-time. I mean, if you're an investor, you have to be there 24/7. So, I mean, we actually have 3 women on our trading desk, 4. We actually just hired somebody. So that we're proud of. But I think that women have a different perspective on investing as well. And we try to recruit more women to actually be investors, you know, as opposed to, there's a lot of women in other departments, investor relations, marketing. That's a much more flexible job in terms of the work-life balance once you get to that. I mean, we've had some women in our firm that have had 5 different jobs, depending on what different point they are in their life, how many kids they have, what they want to do. And I think it's also, you know, I think people forget that it's not so much the gender issue, but for us, it's if you have a talented employee, whether it's a man or a woman, you're going to do everything you can to keep them. So I think that's really the way that a lot of firms should start looking at it. If you have talented women, you want them to rise in your organization, and you want to do everything in your power to keep those women. And it has to be in the culture, and it can't just come from the top, because it also has to be their direct boss. Has to understand that as well. So,
I mean, all studies would suggest that the primary reason a person leaves their place of employment is their relationship with their direct boss.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So that's critical. So in the context when maybe you don't have a direct boss, right? Because I think the idea of you bring your talents to an organization, and then based upon the project, those talents are deployed. So is there a missing social construct by not having a boss?
It's a really interesting question. First of all, I would say, just to respond to some of the talent shortages, those are actually the areas where you're seeing a greater influx of independence, because talent has leverage. So if you look globally to what somebody like the CEO of Kelly is seeing, the place they see the most growth is engineering technology because there's such demand, there's limited supply. If you're independent, you actually have a lot of power.
Correct.
So it's quite interesting that that's driving some of this trend. As you think about an ecosystem where a third of your workforce is independent, you have to imagine a lot of different things: community, support, education. I mean, how do you develop once you enter the independent market? How do you develop your skills so that you don't get frozen at the place at which you enter the market? Today, particularly the caliber of talent that Business Talent Group deals with, you're coming in at a very high level, so it's not so much of an issue. But over time, it is an issue. So you're right. You have to develop a different way of getting your community, of getting your education, your professional development, building teams, getting resources. But the world is sort of keeping up with you.
Okay.
You know, you've got all kinds of crowdsourcing experts. Democratization of information enables an individual to do what they could only do with a firm before. And so you're just seeing a new ecosystem develop around this trend.
Okay, great. So, Chris, when Starbucks goes into parts of the world that are unfamiliar and it's new, I mean, tell us about how you think about the demography of new markets, and both from attracting and retaining employees versus marketing to those diverse communities.
That's a big question. Well, Starbucks is in a lot of places in the world, 60-some-odd countries now, which, you know, and I think we've taken each of those geographies one at a time. I think while we've grown quickly, I don't want to mislead anybody. There's been a lot of thought given to each of those. And I think particularly given that we are a people business, I mean, a lot of people, you know, believe that we're a coffee business, and I think we're primarily a people business, actually serving coffee. And a big piece of that is getting the culture right when you go into a new country. I mean, I think about a couple we're considering today. I think we probably don't start where many businesses would probably start, and thinking about, of course, the market opportunity. But we talk a lot about how to enter a market through the community, because if there's any, and very honestly, you know, we have some really easy entries and some tougher entries. And where we have a really easy entry, it's because we've done a lot of homework in advance to try to understand the culture of the community we're going to, despite the fact that actually people like coffee fairly consistent across the world. Done a lot of homework around how to get in that community the right way, how to make sure that we're earning our license to operate, in that we're not only providing a product, and we expect to be paid for that, of course, but also we're giving back in some way. And that's not just charity, that is having some real relationship with that community before we go in. And then I go back to values. I think that you know, good values are fairly universal. I think everybody would agree with that. And that as we go out, especially in new territories, and I would say, you knew what phrase you used, far-flung territories. The further out we get, I think there's more and more demand for companies that are willing to really put out a vision and view about what they think is important, especially around community. And I think in many ways we've been able to take advantage of that, because that's something we take very seriously. And we're able to attract, I think, some fantastic people that identify with the values of the company. And those values are beyond just profit, which perhaps those opportunities don't exist as much as they might in other places.
Now, so coffee probably doesn't change as quickly as the technology affecting Siemens changes. So as you think, Toby, through your existing workforce, as technology makes some of their positions obsolete, because Greg can't train them then, right? Once they're already in the employee, they're yours. I mean, are you doing some retrofitting from a skill set perspective so that people whose jobs may be changing or morphing due to technology, and how do you retain them?
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge topic. If I were to give you an example, so the wind farms that you'll see coming up along the coast here in UK, and also the wind farms right across the States, trying to bring the cost of a wind turbine down so that it can really compete without subsidies with other forms of wind. Quite a tough job, but of course our engineers are quick onto it. We've got a gearbox in this thing, and a gearbox is a very complicated bit of machinery, and the idea was to get rid of it. So you get rid of a gearbox, and you have a direct electronic drive. And that puts a whole load of technicians, gearbox technicians, out of work, and a whole lot of new guys into work. And of course, for Siemens, it has to be the same people. So we are seeing that we're having to invest more and more in this upskilling. And the other trend that we're seeing is that with the move from electrification to automation to digitalization, is that, yeah, we need people who have got not only mechanical engineering, but mechatronics engineering, and then digimechatronics. In other words, have got a foot in a number of camps. And this is quite hard to find people and to train people with really this very diverse skill set. And that's where we come back to Greg's topic, which is we're continually laying down new qualifications with the institutions that we work with in order to do that, and also have a lot of training facilities that we use ourselves, which, by the way, we also use for our customers. So if I were to talk about it, most managers in Siemens know they haven't got a business unless they've got a significant training budget. It's the people that stand behind the product that will see them through, and that's an immediate problem they have today. This isn't something they've got to deal with tomorrow. They've got to deal with it this week, this month, this year, in order to survive.
So given that rapidly changing dynamic, Greg, how inside your own organization, not so much the students you're turning out, but how are you increasing the skill set and attracting people inside Apollo to deal with this situation?
It's a great question, and I want to tie it into something that you mentioned to Sonia about the investment perspective of this topic. And I spent 15 years on Wall Street as a research analyst. I wrote over 25,000 pages of research with my team on, on company research. And if I could go back and do that again, one of the things I saw about themes over hundreds of companies, they all have access to capital for the most part. Some have more capital-intensive business models than others, right? Some are more service-oriented, some have better returns. But if you look at the greatest companies, the greatest investable companies over time, they have one common theme. They hire great people, they train them, they incent them the right way, and they keep them. Consistently look across the best investments over the past 50 years, and you'll see that theme. And it's the companies that you might think of that figure out how to do that, over time when you look at the Fortune 500. So I looked at those models and studied them. And internally at Apollo Group, at one point, while we were, and still are, one of the largest training organizations, we weren't always employing the best systems and capabilities on our own. So what we're doing now is ensuring that through our HR department, that we have incentives the right way to hire the best, most talented people we can possibly find. I want my hiring managers to always believe they can get people that are smarter than the existing people into the organization, no matter what that takes. We need to set the incentives the right way. What I've learned is people want to be trained. We do surveys. We have 45,000 employees and faculty at Apollo Education Group. And the survey says we want to work for a company that we believe in, has a great mission, is healthy, and is going to do well going forward. But they want to come to an organization where they can learn, be trained, see their career progress, whether they're male or female, and you have to have the right kind of capabilities put inside. So what we've been doing is taking what we're doing with so many other companies in the world and putting them into the Apollo Group, and we're doing that globally, and we didn't always do that. And that's starting to make a difference already as far as what I see our capabilities can be as we become more global. I think it's very, very important when you're going out to hire, in a very competitive world. By the way, when we hire now around the world, we're competing with competition from Asia, right? From China, from India, from Latin America. Look at Brazil, 200 million people and growing. You're not just competing for a position in the United States, right? It's global now. It's cross-border. So you have to attract the talent, and the talent is going to say, what are you going to do for me? If I join your organization, how is my career going to progress? What are you going to provide me in terms of the tools to continue to move my career on? If you don't have a good answer for that, it's going to be hard to get the best talent. If you can't get the best talent in a very competitive world, you're going to lose.
And what are those talents today, Jody? What's most in demand with the project work that you have in your queue?
Well, and I would respond a little bit. You know, I think the point Sonia was making earlier, I would just emphasize. Institutional changes to the way in which people want to work are the only way you're ever going to allow people to have a different kind of work experience closer to what they want in the independent world. So for example, in our company, we let even the most senior executives decide how much they want to work. And half of our executives work less than 40 hours a week by choice, and they can still be promoted and they can still have the interesting work, but it's a corporate commitment, and your retention and your recruiting is enormous. And I say this to all of our clients, which is if you institutionally commit to offering a different range of almost individualized work plans, you will be able to recruit the best talent in the world, because it doesn't exist today. And people are looking for something different. They're looking for meaning. They're looking for purpose. They're looking for the ability to make more choice and control over their career. So I think if you're really, even a company as big as Siemens, I think it's an institutional mindset that will have to happen, because the companies who figure this out soon will have a huge advantage. And the ones who don't are going to be left with the people who aren't as attractive in the workforce. So I think we're seeing a big shift now. And you know, one of the lines that I love is that you have to think more about accessing talent than owning talent. And that, you know, I think your research is quite interesting, but I'm curious in the next 50 years whether you'll find the same longevity. I mean, average job tenure now is about, in the US, about 4.5 years. You know, I just think you're seeing a very different fluidity in the labor market, and I think the skills that a company needs to succeed are going to look very different in this century than the last century.
And whatever that is, the companies who are able to attract the best, the smartest, the most you know, passionate, hungry employees are going to do better.
I agree.
By the way, we serve free Starbucks coffee at our corporate headquarters. So,
do you serve free Apollo
advantage.
Education at Starbucks?
We don't. We should talk about it. I think, you know, I was just going to add to that. I think, of course, all that's right. And, you know, I think the institutions that have traditionally provided a lot of things like training, education, I'll tell you, at Starbucks, we believe that that's, you know, that's changed a lot, and that there are a lot of things just falling through the cracks. And I'm going to say education is a big one. And, you know, we, in the U.S. business of Starbucks, very early, the founder and the CEO made a decision to provide health care, which in America is obviously very important versus the rest of the world, to even part-time workers, part-time employees, which made a very big difference in terms of the level of talent we could attract very early on. And I think if you talk to Howard Schultz, the CEO of Starbucks, founder, he would say that that was probably one of the most influential decisions that the company made early on. However, as healthcare got less important in America, what was clear, and I kind of mentioned this earlier, about 70% of the people that work in the company now are students or aspiring students, broad age range, but couldn't get access to education for cost. And a lot of people actually working at Starbucks just could not finish. In fact, a big part of the problem was half the people couldn't finish the degree because they couldn't afford it. And I think we have recently created a program to provide funding for college education within the company to actually everybody in the company that wants it over time. We don't know what that means yet, so we'll see. But I think that increasingly institutions are going to have to, businesses are going to have to step in to provide a lot of things that people took for granted for a long time. If you look at the cost of education across the UK, America, I mean, it's gotten ridiculously expensive. And I think that's going to be an opportunity to grab talent, because not everybody's going to be able to do that. And the ones that invest behind it, because it's not inexpensive, will absolutely be able to find a way to attract particularly millennials who we know are less interested in maybe just cash and more interested in what else they can get from the relationship. And I love the idea of accessing talent, not owning talent. I think that's exactly right.
So, Sonia, when you think about Avenue, I mean, would that be appealing to you to access someone who would, on a project-specific basis, would work at Avenue but not really work for Avenue?
Not for us, because we have 200 employees, so that wouldn't work for us. I mean, I could see if you have a big organization doing that. I mean, for us, it's important that although we do allow flexible work schedules, and as you said, I mean, whether people are middle management or senior, if they're talented, then you do want to be flexible because you want to retain them. And again, I mean, a lot of that is really focused on women because there is such a work-life balance issue for them in particular, but it also comes up with men. But no, for us, it's important that we have full-time employees that are committed 100%, and we're committed to them 100%. It's not really a project-oriented business. So.
And Chris, you have, given the employee population has an average tenure of like two and a quarter years or something. I mean, have you done any quantification of if you could just retain them to 3 years? Gosh, you'd save a lot of money on the HR expense of the churn of those people. And like, what are some of the tools you think about deploying in that vein?
I'm sure we have. I'm sure someone has that number. I do not. And I'm glad I don't, because actually that's not the way we look at it. Of course, we want to expand tenure, length of tenure, but I think almost everything we do is related to that. I mean, I look at almost anything we work on, and it's all about once you get somebody great in the business, assuming that you've taken the time to get the right value set on the front end, because that's where we probably spend more time, then we invest quite a lot in then trying to lengthen somebody's tenure, either through flexibility, because moms are great for us, as are dads. I would say there's equal opportunity there. But you know, flexibility is important, especially in a retail environment, allowing people to work different parts of the day and over the weeks, and that's been a big benefit for us. And yeah, I think almost everything we're doing is about keeping people longer, because we know that has a business benefit, but most importantly, a business benefit broadly, but most importantly, that is really important to our customers. You know, in a retail business, when you come to Starbucks, you don't want to see somebody new every day. That kind of screws up the whole system. And I think that's true of most businesses, though. I wouldn't, really important.
I think it's important when you mention, you know, moms and dads. It'd be, you know, my experience when my kids were younger, if I left work early to run to a baseball game or a dance recital, everyone was like applauding, like, wow, what a great dad. And that's such. But if some of the women that at work did it, it was always looked on a bit askance, like, well, see, she's really not fully participating in the workforce because she needs to leave early all the time. And I thought just the experience I was observing that and how I was treated versus some of my female colleagues was quite different. So I want to, these smaller sessions are meant to be more participatory, so I would like to, at this point, open it up to any questions from the audience. Yes, sir. If you'd stand up and just identify yourself and ask your question. We have a microphone for you. Excuse me. There's a mic just coming. There you go.
Try again. I'm Charles Lubar from Morgan, Lewis & Bacchus, the multinational legal partnership. The theme of this program is talent without borders, but the problem is there are a lot of borders. And I just wondered what the experience of the panel has been in dealing with the immigration laws that you may face when you try to cross-border all this talent you're dealing with every day.
You know, the Wall Street Journal had a conference last year in Washington, D.C., and there were probably 250 Fortune 500 CEOs there. Very, very interesting. Everybody broke into small groups the second day and talked about what are the largest issues impeding or concerning them for growth. There were two tied for first. One was immigration, and one was education reform, right? And the ability to expand and grow educationally. The topics that we've been talking about in terms of, you know, working with corporations and training and closing skills gaps. Those were the two. So it is absolutely on their minds. It's a big concern. And I think that until that issue gets addressed, it's going to continue to be one of the top, you know, concerns about can organizations get enough talent, right, into their, because you look at, there's quite a few surveys currently that you can access from well-known organizations, and you will see one of the biggest concerns at the top always for large and growing companies, and smaller employers as well. I can't get the talent I need to do this specific job. Again, I'll speak for the US. Why is that with 30 million people on the sidelines? Right? And immigration is one of the issues, right, that's top of mind that could help solve that.
But even beyond immigration, the legal framework globally is designed for a very traditional employer-employee relationship. And when you start talking about a third of the workforce being freelance in the US, and then you combine the antiquated legal structure, which not only is antiquated at a federal level, but is different in each of our 50 states. So you can imagine what it's like to deal with talent across the states and across the country and across the world. The whole system needs to be revisited, and it needs to be rationalized based on what's really happening in the world today. It's a huge challenge.
Yes. Wait, we'll bring you a microphone.
Sunil Krishnan, BT Pension Scheme Management. So we're not a large firm, but as people who are familiar with the investment management industry know you have to deal with managing people who are kind of quite high intellectual capital, often quite young. Very interesting session. I could ask a bunch of questions. If I can, I'll just restrict myself to two. One is, we've heard a lot about the idea of accessing rather than owning talent, but also about the importance to train. And I just wonder if there is a tension there in terms of at what point does the crossover come, and maybe it never comes. Is the right answer that you look to train your staff as if they'll work for you forever, and it just, in your experience, just works out better that way? Or is there a kind of point at which you say, look, it's no longer in the best interest of the business, and so we need to draw a line somewhere? And the other question is, I think often managers are aware of the desire of their staff to get more autonomy in their work and so on, but the managers themselves feel restricted in their ability to do that. And I wonder what your experience is of the best way to allow managers the freedom to manage talented staff in that way, because often I think that's where the restriction comes rather than at the lower level or at the top of the organization. Thanks.
Toby, why don't you try it?
Yeah, well, I think, sorry, the first question, if I understood it, I mean, I think it's going to be one of those topics where actually what we're seeing is the way people learn is also moving very rapidly. So the way people learn is no longer away in big institutions, going away and doing their learning and then coming back and doing their doing. Learning and earning are becoming much more integrated, and I think that will continue. So my feeling is that there will be a cutoff, certainly in terms of the more expensive forms of training. And when you talk about engineering training particularly, that is extremely expensive. And therefore you'll want maybe more commitment from people. But I do echo what I hear being spoken about across the panel, and that is that we will see, I think, a divergence of different work patterns. For some people, workforce agility means independence. I can do what I want to do. But for other people, it means job insecurity. It means I don't know why and when. And of course, if your skills are in demand, you have the power. When your skills aren't in demand, that agility actually means that the company can pull you in when they want and then drop you when they don't. So access to learning, I think, will become a very critical, you heard with Starbucks, a way of engaging your employees and remaining and keeping them engaged, whether they're in the outside community or in the inside. So I think we will have, and we already do have, communities of practice that we invest in keeping third parties up to date with our technology so that they can work for us on call when we need them. And that's part of the deal. And that's part of maintaining their employability. So just in summary, I just think that the way people learn are changing. The learning and earning topic means that this will kind of fan out into a number of different relationships and contractual relationships as well. So I'm sure our legal friends will have to get onto it.
And just briefly on your second point, I think if the culture is one that stifles innovation because experimentation or failure is so punished inside an organization, that tends to inflict paralysis on managers in restricting their employees' behaviors. If you create an environment where failure is encouraged, as odd as that sounds, you are then, by definition, experimenting to try new things that are innovative. So I think that's a cultural thing inside an organization that the organization can set.
And it's also the way the organization evaluates people that can be very restrictive. Yes. For example, most organizations have their grids with A players, B players, C players. If you're not working a standard work week, you're not an A player by definition. So that's very restrictive. If you don't progress at a certain rate, you're considered off the main track. So there are little things that are sort of embedded in the way the culture evaluates people that I think can be really restrictive without even realizing it.
I also think a healthy, well, you train some people and you hope they stay with you forever. A healthy amount of turnover is not bad.
That's good. Yes.
Technology is changing so many of our businesses and industries that, it sounds like you're an investor. I'd be asking the question, are you hiring for skills that you're going to need 2 years from now, 3 years from now? Because those talents might be different than the workforce that you have right now. Right. It's changing that quickly.
The forever model is anachronistic because the data shows you that people leave every 4 to 5 years. So it's not.
Yeah. So I mean, just picking up on that. I mean, we work with our competitors and our suppliers and our customers to actually increase the pool of engineering and talent, because actually that serves us all. You create a pool which you can then draw on. So we collaborate hugely on that education topic. And I think that's an important strategy.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much, Richard. 2 questions. One to Toby. How do we get more people to study engineering at university? And a point to Gregory. Just on your point about retention of staff, speaking as an employee, what is the optimal number of years you should spend with an employer? Because when you speak to headhunters, they say that you've got to be careful, you don't want to get too institutionalized. So is there, it was 4 years was mentioned as the average. I mean, if you're looking from an employer's perspective at potential talent, if someone's been in a job for 10 years, is that too long? How do you feel about it? What's the optimal number of years?
You want to go first?
Okay, so yeah, I think the idea of getting people into university in an engineering sense, that starts actually with parents. It starts very, very early on, making sure that they actually have an aspiration. And one of the difficulties we have is that engineering, certainly in some cultures, is still seen as a greasy, oily rag topic. When you just take schools, parents and their teachers into some of the laboratories, into some of the technical areas, into some of our factories, show them some of the projects we're doing, they're blown away. And it will be the engineers that shape the world that we live in, and it will be the engineers also that overcome a lot of the world's problems today. And that really fires up the imagination. So that's one end, is really kick-starting the imagination of parents, teachers, at that end. But it has to be then worked through so that not only in university, so that collaborations we talked about earlier with universities, that connection is made, and that people can see, if I go to university, there is a destination job, there is an outcome for me, and that outcome is well paid and well remunerated, but also that they get their hand held, I guess, through school, and that we increase the vocational route. And for me, it's, university is one destination, but certainly a lot of our employees come through the vocational route via apprenticeship schemes. And now 30% of our, certainly in the UK and in Northwest Europe, 30% of our graduate population are selected out of our apprenticeship cadres. And they stay with us longer, and they understand the business from the bottom up. So it's quite an interesting route into university as well. Okay.
Second part of your question is 3.96 years. No, I'm kidding. I don't. There is no perfect answer to that. I don't think. let me give you my perspective on it quickly, because I know we just have a minute left. The business that we're in of education has changed very dramatically over the last 5 years. I see Mr. Milken in the front row. I've cried on his shoulder a lot of times, trying to figure out where is it going and how do we, how do we do really well again and serve the world. And here is the big difference between 5 years ago and today. The business of education has changed dramatically for all the things we're talking about up here, what Starbucks is doing and Siemens is doing. As long as your skill as an employee is relevant, right, to what's needed today and probably into tomorrow as well, I think your tenure is fine to continue if the employee has the passion and the will and desire to continue to learn while they're employed at their current employer. If they don't, and in our case, we had to reskill a huge chunk of our labor force. Why? We didn't go sit down with Siemens and Starbucks and others and ask, what do you need? How can we empower your human capital growth? If we don't understand that and our employees don't have the skills to go in and have those kinds of conversations, we're not going to be relevant to them. And we're not going to be creating the right kind of content and curriculum, which we talked about up front, right, to empower their human capital growth. And their human capital growth, again, they have access to chief financial capital in most places in the world, is what's going to power, I think, their growth all over the world. So to me, it's having the relevant skills and the will to continue to train yourself no matter what level you're at, right, throughout your career. You can stay as long as you want, as long as you're willing to do that. The employer is willing to provide you with it.
Well, we unfortunately are out of time, but since we do have Mike Milken here in the first row, I would like to ask him a question. Mike, since you have financed companies all over the world and created countless jobs, barring the exceptional leadership of your own organization, what would you say are some of the traits and talents that make for extraordinary leaders?
Building culture. What do you believe in? What do you stand for? I think it's essential today in a social media world that people feel proud of the organization they're associated with. And I think you see that there's a clear understanding of the direction you're going or what you want to achieve and what you want to stand for. Where it's confused, I think it makes it very difficult as to what you want to do. And for example, Starbucks, I think in a world that they live in has done an excellent job of trying and communicating to their own employees. And quite often communicating to your own employees is more important than communicating to the outside world, because they're going to interact with the outside world. And therefore, a few years ago, I sat down with the CEO of Goldman Sachs during difficult financial periods and told him that the most important thing he could do is show leadership for his own employees. And one of the most expensive areas for any company is losing employees you don't want to lose. And one of the most expensive areas for a company is not losing employees you want to lose. So I think we spend a lot of time recruiting rather than making sure that those people of talent feel that there's a path for them at that organization. And I think it comes back to culture, and it comes back to what does the company stand for. And I think those great companies, and Greg and I have talked about it, I've spent a lot of time with the management of Siemens, particularly in the United States, on this issue. And most of your panel is fully aware of this issue. And that's what makes a great company. You wonder, most people maybe have an idea what to do, they just can't execute. And they can't execute because they don't have the team that's capable of executing. And one of the most difficult things for a company is to realize that you cannot take advantage of opportunities because you don't have the talent to take advantage of opportunities. Right. And the probability that your talent will not succeed is very high. So a lot of times you want to do something, but you can't do it because you don't have the talent. And you start, and then you wonder what went wrong. But I would say I'd use the word culture. I know in my first conversations with a man named Henry Kissinger 4 decades ago. He reminded me that culture beats strategy all the time. So you think you have a strategy, but it just doesn't work. And so you have a culture. And, you know, in Europe, you have multiple cultures that you're trying to get the European community to work. And you have to figure out how to deal with multiple cultures.
All right, thank you, Mike. So we are out of time. I want to sincerely thank our panelists for participating today, and lunch will be served. Please join us for the rest of the afternoon sessions. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, our main lunch will be served on level 31, which is up 1 floor. For information on today's sessions, please consult your program or event app. Thank you.